who is this movie for exactly? Hey everyone, Ryan Reed here, and today we're talking about the new Netflix film Fear Street Part 1, 1994, the first part in a three-part film, Fear Street trilogy. I literally just got done watching this movie just a few minutes ago before I started this recording, and I'm kind of baffled by it. That doesn't mean that I disliked it, it's just kind of all over the place. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with the Fear Street series, originally it was a series of young adult books written by R.L. Stine, who famously wrote Goosebumps, of course. He started, I think, in 1989 with them, and then they ran through the 90s a little bit, and then they kind of started and stopped. And I never really read any of them. Goosebumps was my book series when I was a kid. I loved Goosebumps. Loved it, loved it, loved it. But Fear Street was, from what I understand, always aimed at a slightly older audience, like a teenage audience. Some of the material was a little darker, and, you know, some of the drama within it was a little bit aimed at an older audience. So it just wasn't something I read because I read a lot of Goosebumps, and then when I got older, I just read different books. So Fear Street was never really in my kind of rotation of books I read. But I did hear that they were doing this three-part film series at Netflix, and their big approach to it was that they were going to take the elements of Fear Street and kind of make them R-rated movies. I think I read something where R.L. Stine said something like, yeah, the books were always kind of like PG, PG-13, and they're kind of going with a more R-rated film here, which I thought was interesting until I sat down and watched the first movie. Again, that's not to say that it's bad, but I don't know if this world of like PG, PG-13, you know, young adult novels works with like a hard R movie. Which honestly, 90% of this movie is not a hard R movie anyway. With a few, you know, less shots of like blood and stuff, it probably could have been a PG-13, I think. The plot of the film involves a group of teenagers who are trying to figure out this kind of like mystery of these killings that happen in this town of Shadyside. And while I was watching the first like 2/3 of this movie, I couldn't tell if I liked it or not. Parts of it I really, really enjoyed. There's an opening scene where it's shot beautifully, like the colors pop really well, and there's a lot of really cool gels and lighting, and I really, really liked that aspect of it. And also, they kind of got the 90s aesthetic pretty spot on. If you're not even familiar with what's going on with this film series, basically, it's three movies taking place at different times. The first one is taking place in 1994, then they're going back in time to 1978, and then I think the third one is like 1666 or something like that, and they're coming out a week apart, so the next one will be next week. And I will say, watching this has made me kind of intrigued to see where these films go, but it's got tonal problems, I think. When I was watching it, I could not tell for the life of me if this teen drama that they were kind of creating was intentionally kind of cheesy or not. It felt like Scream to me. Like Scream had a lot of like melodrama in it and everything. And so at first I was like, oh, maybe what they're trying to do is kind of like grab that style, that very, as I like to call it, the Dawson's Creek syndrome versions of slasher movies in the 90s, like I Know What You Did Last Summer and Scream, of course, and Urban Legend, and all those movies where it was very like high melodrama. You had a lot of like TV actors and stuff, and then it was, you know, the slasher movie tropes and stuff on top of that. But there's also part of me that feels like that wasn't intentional. Like they kind of wrote this movie that's very much a teenage movie, and it feels like they're trying to pull in the audience of like Stranger Things or that PG-13 horror movie crowd. But then they're kind of like trying to push the envelope a little bit. Like some good examples, of course, there's a lot more swearing than you maybe would put in like a PG-13 movie. One of the characters, and this kind of felt out of place for most of the movie until it became a plot point at the end of the movie. One of the characters is a drug dealer. The drug dealer happens to be the cheerleader. So it's like the main character has this cast of friends, and one of them is kind of like this kind of like, I don't know what you'd call him, like your typical kind of like stoner drug character in like a teenage movie. And then she's got a friend who's not popular, but she's like a cheerleader, and she's kind of, but then they like flip that on the head and they're like, oh, she's the one selling drugs. And it's kind of like, okay, sure. And then, like I said, they're trying to kind of like push the envelope because so much of this movie is just high teenage drama. Oh, I'm in love with this person, but they moved and they don't love me. And oh my gosh, like, and all the characters, aren't really likable. I mean, they function fine for what the movie needs them to be. This movie has like a weird tone, and like I said, I can't tell what's gonna really factor in to tell me if it was intentional or not is that the way that they portray the next two movies. So if 1978 feels like a movie from that time period, somewhere between Halloween and like the big slasher boom of like the early 80s, like if it feels like those movies, then I'll know that this tone was intentional. If it doesn't, then I think they're kind of they're they're presenting their movie to the wrong audience because they're trying to pull in everybody. Oh, were you a fan of Fear Street growing up? You're going to enjoy this. Oh, are you a teenager now and you want to watch a horror movie? You're going to enjoy this. Oh, do you like, slasher movies? You're going to enjoy this. But it doesn't really play great to everybody. I think it's got really big flaws. I didn't hate this movie. I felt like they were trying to like push the envelope. But honestly, like I said, if you took out most of the violence in this movie is like a knife stab. And so it's like, oh, someone gets stabbed and there's some blood. Take out some of that blood, you got and maybe a little bit of the swearing. You got like a PG-13 movie. And so it would fit in with like, oh, it's like the drama and everything. It's like teenage high school drama and it's aimed at that audience. And look, I get it. When I was in high school, like, of course I was watching R-rated slasher films and stuff. And so maybe they're trying to appeal to people, be like, oh, this is kind of like, oh, you shouldn't be watching this. But like in today's day and age, does anybody really think like that about like slasher movies? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I just don't feel like slasher movies of the 80s and like 90s are looked at in the same way as like being like, parents aren't looking down their nose like, harumph, you shouldn't be watching that. So it's just kind of like this weird tonal blend of what is this movie. And a good example of this, like the movie also has like weird moments that don't fit in. Like there's a moment where they've kind of figured out this major plot detail and then everybody just starts hooking up at this like weird random 5-minute scene. And like I get it, like that's a big thing about slasher films was of course people having sex, like the nudity and stuff. But at the same time, like A, that was a product of its time, and B, most of those characters from a movie standpoint did not know that people were dying around them when they were doing that, which is what made the scene so kind of like terrifying at the time, because it was these intimate moments where they were being stalked by this killer or somebody else is there or something, and that's what made those scenes kind of function and work. But here it's just like everybody knows exactly what's going on. They know who's trying to kill them. They know all this stuff. But we're just going to stop and have this 5-minute scene where people start like hooking up and stuff. It's weird. It feels weird and out of place. And that's not me trying to sound prudish. I don't really care. It's just like a weird placement and a weird scene, and it felt just kind of like, why is this here? Why is this in the movie at all? The best comparison to me, I think, this is why I kind of feel like I don't know if they completely understand the tone they're going for, is it feels like American Horror Story. American Horror Story is a television series that I always want to love, and then I go in to watch it, and it's always terrible to me, because they don't understand their tone, they don't understand their kind of like who the audience is. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, we're doing this high melodrama, and it's kind of like that, except this is like a cast of like people supposed to be in high school. I'm sure they're actors, I'm sure they're older than that, but like that's it's like, oh, if you take American Horror Story and mix it with Stranger Things, it just, those two things do not go together. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'll watch 1978, then the Fear Street 1978, the next one that comes out, and I'll go, oh yeah, oh, I totally get it. That was an intentional tone. But I don't know if it is. Hey everyone, Ryan here, jumping in from a few hours into the future, which I guess is still technically the past for you guys, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, at this point in the video, I kind of went on a tangent talking about the last 30 minutes of the movie in detail and how tonally I thought that the last 30 minutes were just completely all over the place. But rather than jumping into all these major spoilers, I've kind of rethought that. I took a break from recording the video, ate some dinner, kind of calmed down a little bit. And I'll say this instead. Rather than go into detail about everything, I will say that the last 30 minutes of this movie get incredibly brutal. And to me, that feels out of nowhere for this movie. Now, I am the first person to applaud a good gore or makeup effect or, a creative death in a movie or something like that, like, I'm the first person to say, oh, that's interesting, that's creative, or I didn't expect that. But in this movie, the last 30 minutes kind of packs in so much heavy, dark, over the top material and gore and just kind of all this craziness that it felt so tonally incorrect for the movie that they were creating. And I know some people, some reviewers out there are gonna applaud this. They're gonna, and that's totally fine. They're gonna look at that and be like, "Oh, so bold of them to do this." To me, it didn't read like that. To me, it read more like a tonal disconnect. It read like a section of the movie that didn't feel complete with the rest of the film because of how extreme it got. Which, again, that doesn't bug me. I don't care that the movie has like a lot of gore at the end or anything like that. Whatever. But it was kind of, I was taken aback by it, and it was a little off-putting just because the movie has such a major tonal shift at that point. The movie already is kind of tiptoeing around darker subject matter, and obviously there's more on-screen deaths and there's blood and stuff like that. That's totally fine. But I feel like there's a disconnect between what the movie wants to be and what the movie actually is at that point. For this movie to kind of feel like that, be a nostalgic sort of 90s movie that's also like a teenage melodrama. For the last 30 minutes of this movie to just go complete exploitation film, just extreme gore and dark material and just things you wouldn't normally throw in a movie like that. To me, it didn't read as bold or inventive or, oh, they're taking a different direction. It read more as, all right, now let's shove in some violence. Let's make this extreme now. But then the movie also wants to have its cake and eat it too, without going into spoilers, but based on the reaction other characters have to these moments afterwards. It wants us to feel for these characters, but then the movie treats their deaths like they're expendable, like they're there in purpose of just getting some more gore out. And considering the rest of the deaths in this movie are not that gory, all things considered, yes, some people, they are still very violent, but there's not a lot of just intense gore. It felt out of place and incorrect and tonally kind of just inconsistent and just tonally wrong. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with tone shifting within movie. I love movies that have comedy and they jump to horror and they make you laugh and they make you shocked and they make you, they take you places that you weren't expecting. That's what film's all about. But I also think there's an understanding of knowing how to balance that tone, and I don't think this movie pulls it off. So, that all being said, I just wanted to kind of jump in, rather than go in, spoil all this stuff for people, go into, detail. Just be warned, if you are interested in this movie and you don't like a lot of violence and gore, you might be able to handle the first, 2/3, but there is a pretty brutal death. And then a second death that's fairly brutal for this movie that happens, and it feels out of place. So just be aware of that if you're going in. Also some dark subject matter. Like I said, I know I've said that a couple times now, but just be aware the last 30 minutes of this movie takes something that's already kind of edgy, quote unquote, trying to be edgy, I guess, and it makes it extreme. And I don't think that completely works. So take that with a grain of salt. Go in, watch the movie for yourself. And now back to the rest of the review. I recommend watching the movie. I think it's worth a watch, especially if you're curious to see, as I am, where the next kind of two movies go. But it's not perfect. If I had to give a number score, which I never do on here, if it was a 5-point system, I'd give it a 3. It's fine, it's passable, but I don't think tonally they completely understand their movie. Also, so many needle drops. Just a minor note. I don't need a needle drop there's literally a needle drop that and in case you don't know what a needle drop is, it's when you put in a song like an artist song, like a Rob Zombie song or something like that, instead of like soundtrack music that a composer has created. There's literally a needle drop that interrupts a needle drop to make the point clear. Oh, we're in the 90s. oh, here's a 90s song, here's a 90s song, we don't need needle drops every 5 seconds. Again, unless you were trying to kind of emulate those 90s movies, in which case, yes, they all had a lot of needle drops, and it drives me crazy. But here, if you weren't trying to do that, you don't need a needle drop every 5 seconds to remind me that it's the 90s. I get it. I get the movie's called 1994. I get the point. Anyway, those are my thoughts on it. Did you enjoy Fear Street Part 1, 1994? Let me know if you liked it in the comments down below. Do you think I'm way off base, like, on my assessment? Or do you kind of agree with me that, like, it's tonally all over the place and doesn't completely work? Also, on top of that, if you want to see more videos like this, check out some of my other impromptu reviews. I've got all kinds of movie reviews there that are just off the top of my head, kind of like this. You've also got more of my analytical written reviews, like Fright Films. Plus, you've got all my artwork videos, all kinds of good stuff on the channel. So subscribe if you want to see more like this video, and I'll talk to you guys next time.